Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm making a short video about this book I recently read called At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell. This is a book that's like a biography slash philosophy book. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what philosophy is actually an area that I'm very passionate about. Ever since I was in high school, I started reading some philosophy books, and ever since then I was hooked. Essentially, philosophy is the love of wisdom. It comes down to, the kinds of big questions of life, like, what is the meaning of life? What kind of life should we live? How do we distinguish what is right and what is wrong, like good and moral versus bad and immoral behavior? And it concerns itself with a lot of questions about how do we know what is true? How do we differentiate the truth from what's false? And so philosophy, at least I think, it's pretty important, just having it to some extent. It's kind of important to life because it helps you form the foundation for your behaviors and your actions and the way that you live. When you have a certain kind of philosophy that works as a foundation or the groundwork for how you view life, it helps put like a kind of frame around how you see the world, which can guide your behavior, it can guide your intentions, it can guide your outlook, it can guide who you are as a person and who you want to be in the future. There are many different philosophers that you can read, and a lot of philosophers honestly aren't very great writers. They usually try to make these very complex, really difficult to understand philosophies, and they try to write about them in these books. But usually, in order for me to really understand most philosophers and what they're saying, I have to get some kind of help. I have to go get books that try to explain in more modern day language what these philosophers from long ago were really trying to say. I have to usually check out books from the library about these philosophers and what they were trying to say with their philosophy in a way that I understand it. So this book, At the Existentialist Cafe, it's about the quote-unquote existentialist philosophers, or the philosophers who comprise the view of existentialism. Now, you might have heard of existentialism before, or you might not have heard about it, and you might be like, existentialism, like, what the hell is that? Like, what's that all about? But it's actually not so complex or as complicated as it initially sounds. It's actually one of the philosophies that I really like, because I think it's a kind of philosophy that's very applicable to our everyday lives. And essentially, what existentialism is and what the existentialist philosophers believed was that humans ultimately were all free. We have freedom. And what they mean by that is we have the ability to make our own choices and the decisions that have a big impact in our lives. Who we are is largely the byproduct of the decisions that we make and the choices that we make in our lives. If we choose to be healthy, if we choose to be kind to people, if we choose to do whatever in life, the kinds of decisions that we make based on our guiding principles will play a very big role in who we become as a person in the future, and also in the present as of, right now. And this idea of choices and decisions that we make, it doesn't just apply to small things like what we're gonna wear, what we're gonna eat on this given day, or what we're gonna do on the weekend. It really comes down to the big questions of life. The questions like, what is the meaning of life? What is good versus what is wrong? What am I going to do for my career? What kind of work do I find meaningful as an individual? These kinds of things, the things that we choose in those areas, have a very profound impact on our life as a whole. It really shapes how we are going to live our life. And these existentialists, they believe that because this freedom is so important, one of the reasons why humans, a lot of the times, why we don't want to embrace the freedom that we really have, why we try to avoid making all of these difficult choices, why we try to kind of get away from our freedom, is because when you have all this freedom, they believe that you can end up getting a lot of anxiety. Anxiety arises to the existentialists because when you realize the impact that all of these choices have on your life, that can make you anxious. You might say to yourself, how do I know I'm making the right decision? How do I know that I'm not making the wrong decision? How do I, we might begin to think about things like, what kinds of repercussions, what kinds of consequences will these decisions have in the future and on myself? So with all of this freedom comes responsibility. We are responsible for the choices that we make. And because we're responsible for the choices that we make, we have to realize that, it's a very big deal, and that can cause a lot of anxiety for us as an individual and as a person, because we don't know whether we're making the right choice. The responsibility and the weight of the responsibility behind our choices causes us to be anxious and have a lot of anxiety in our lives. So these are the kinds of themes that the existentialists focus on. They focus on the fact that you, regardless of what you might initially think, actually have more freedom than you initially believe. You might think that you have to go and do this in terms of a career, or that you have to, maybe you majored in something in college, but then you found out that that wasn't what you were passionate about. You might think, well, that's what I majored in, I have to have a career that's specified in that area. But existentialists would make you say, or the existentialists would say, why do you have to do that? Maybe you have parents or friends who are pressuring you to go down one path that they think is right for you. You are more free than you think you are. You don't actually have to do just one thing. You don't have just one option. You are free to choose many different things. The way that we view life, we might think that, similar to this little spot right here that made me think about it, we might think that there's just one path for us to follow. We might look and say, okay, I have my clear-cut path. I don't have my clear way that I'm going to go. This is the plan. This is what I've envisioned for myself. But the existentialists would try to break this notion of there only being one path that you could follow, or there being only one path that you have to follow. The existentialists would try to think of ways to make you think about what other options do I have that I haven't currently, or to this point, I haven't thought of before. That's one of the reasons why I think that existentialism is a really interesting and helpful philosophy. Is I think the foundation of the philosophy is for you to question your limitations and to kind of seek out how you are going to be free in the world that you live in by exploring all of the options that you have, even options that you didn't think of, in the past, that you haven't thought of until this moment. You might begin to actually explore which options you had never considered before. And for this reason, existentialism is a very individual-based philosophy. It's very much based on, separating the individual from the quote-unquote collective or the masses or the crowd. Existentialism more or less focuses on what is right for us as individuals. It's a very relative philosophy, meaning in many cases, there is no right or wrong answer. It's more about what is right for you. You might come to your own conclusion about what your morals are. You might come to your own conclusion about what the meaning of life is. And to them, whatever is right for you, that's the path that you should be following, not necessarily what other people think is right for you. And it's interesting to think because existentialism came about during a time, historically speaking, where there were lots of different regimes, and during the World War II days, where you had the Nazis, or you had the Soviet Union, or some other thing like that. It was kind of like fall in line with what this regime or what this collective is telling you. And existentialism was more about thinking for yourself and saying, well, why should I follow this regime? Why should I follow what this specific government is telling me? I should be able to think for myself and determine for myself what the best path is for me and how I should behave for myself. So in this book, at the Existentialist Cafe, Sarah Bakewell, this book right here, it's really more of a biography than a philosophy book. If you're looking for a book that explores, just the philosophy of existentialism, this book probably is not the book that you'll want to read. This is a book that's based more on the lives of the different philosophers. The philosophers who essentially founded existentialism as a way of thinking were two French philosophers named Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. I think that's how you say her name. I think it's French. Simone de Beauvoir. And they were the two philosophers who were responsible for taking these ideas and making them into this thing that we call existentialism today. There were previous philosophers before them, like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and even Heidegger, who had a way of thinking that was very similar to the existentialists and can technically be referred to as existentialism, but in their day, existentialism didn't exist. It wasn't until Sartre and Beauvoir came along and they made, they kind of packaged it into this thing of existentialism. It's definitely influenced the way that we think today in our culture because it helps people think in a more individualistic way about what is right for them, determining what their values are, determining who they want to be, and kind of shedding off certain kinds of social limitations that other people pose on each other. So anyway, if you're interested in learning a little bit about the existentialist philosophers, I would recommend this book. It was a good read, a good biography that has a little bit of philosophy in there. It explains who these philosophers were and what they believed and some of their life events that played a role in the formation of their philosophy. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think about existentialism in the comments. Do you think that existentialism sounds cool? Do you think it sounds a little flawed? I obviously think that every philosophy has its flaws. But what are some of the things that you like or dislike about existentialism? Let me know in the comments. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.